So this presentation will provide an update on the Biteback program since 2018 until now. The data displayed on the following slides have been collected from 1080 baiting records, hard copy maps supplied by landholders, and wild dog activity data recorded through the Wild Dog Scan app, which includes data supplied by land managers and also by the professional trappers that work out with the landholders in the region. Much of the data in the presentation is focused on what's called Region 1, or the inside fence section of the region, because this is where wild dogs are a declared pest for destruction and baiting is mandatory to protect the sheep industry. Just wait for that bit of delay to catch up. There we go. So as I said, the main focus of this presentation is on Region 1, or what we call inside the fence. And you can see on the map there, that greyed out area, that's what constitutes Region 1. And it's the pastoral unincorporated area that's found inside the dog fence within the SA Arid Lands region. And there's a little bit, you can see at the bottom there, that's outside the yellow line that falls outside of the Sow region as well on the east. And there's also a little bit on the west that falls out of our region as well. But the majority of it is in our region. So as most people know, there's mandatory baiting requirements. So all landholders in this area, irrespective of land tenure, must lay at least one wild dog bait per kilometre of all vehicle tracks across the entire property in spring and again in autumn. So this level of baiting must be completed in autumn and spring each year, even if there's no evidence of wild dogs on the property, and that's legislated as mandatory. So there is a little bit extra that is on top of that as well, which is that if there is activity present on the property, and this is what Charlie was alluding to before, is then properties must increase their baiting to 5 baits per kilometre of track for a 10 kilometre section of track from that activity radiating out from that activity. And this increased baiting must continue until there's no activity present. And the presence of wild dogs really should be reported to all neighbours and the board, so that, you know, if one neighbour's having trouble with dogs, it's likely that there's going to be dogs affecting the neighbour's property as well. So it's really important to share that information. Right, so with this slide, I'd like to start about talking about total participation at coordinated injection services, which is represented on this graph as the orange columns. So at first glance, you can see that participation in the baiting program for 2023-24 on the right-hand side of the screen for that financial year was around 80%, which is the highest participation rate that we've had for 6 years. And in fact, it's the highest participation rate at coordinated injection services we've had since the Biteback program started in 2009. This is a fantastic outcome considering it's now mandatory for baiting within the region. And like I said before, even if there's no sign of wild dogs, it's good to see that people are doing that preventative control. The intent of the wild dog policy is to ensure land managers are sharing that responsibility for wild dog control by baiting at a landscape scale. So I guess that poses a question too. So with mandatory baiting, so what about the 20% of properties that didn't bait during that 2023-24 financial year? And how do we help them meet their baiting requirement obligations into the future? If some properties are baiting and others are not, there's a strong chance that wild dogs will persist and travel through the environment without coming into contact with a bait, which of course, you know, runs the risk of breeding up populations and increased predation in the future. When we look at that data and we break it down a little bit more, we find that, you know, 45% of properties are meeting their baiting obligations. That's the 1 bait per kilometre of track in spring and again in autumn, which has actually gone up by 8% since the last financial year. This is a fantastic increase and can be, I think it can be contributed to the mandatory baiting requirements. For this group of properties that are actually meeting their requirements, all I can say is fantastic job. I hope it keeps up, and I hope these properties continue to maintain their engagement and their involvement with the program. That's shown in the green column there over the last few years. Now, the next group is the orange column, and that makes up 35% of properties. And they're properties that are actually baiting, but they're not actually meeting their amount of baiting that they're meant to be doing on their property. Now, it's great that they're baiting. But the problem is, I guess, it means that there's been an overall increase in the baiting by around 20%, but it also means that 12% of properties are actually under their requirement or level of baiting. So we've certainly got a bit of a way to go to actually get those guys up to speed and to make sure that they're baiting at the right level to ensure that we've got that landscape coverage under the current mandatory baiting. And of course, the final 20% of properties are the concerning bit. They're properties that aren't baiting at all. And that is a real concern. And although this group of properties, has decreased 19% in the last, financial year, it's still quite a large number of properties that we need to work on to make sure that we get them up to the required level of baiting that is needed. Properties that fall into this category would have received a letter from the SA Arid Lands Landscape Board to remind them of their baiting obligations. And if you are one of the properties that has received one of these letters and hasn't baited yet, then please give us a call and make sure that you get baits, because you are in breach of legislation. And to avoid compliance, you really need to get some baits out on the ground as soon as possible. Right, so now I wanted to talk about some of the data that we collect. So the Biteback program's reliant on wild dog activity information shared by landholders to guide the program. The information is used to determine where aerial baiting needs to occur, where extra injection services need to be coordinated, and where extra training is required, where professional trappers need to be deployed as well. And it's also used to look at wild dog trends over time and to determine if the program is actually making a difference. These days, most wild dog activity has been recorded through an app called Wild Dog Scan, and if you're not using it, I suggest you, look it up on the App Store and download it on your phone. And if you need some advice on how to use it, please give us a call. We're more than happy to talk you through it or send you some guides to help you out. We've been collecting information through hard copy maps, but most of it these days is supplied through Wild Dog Scan, to the point that only about 8% of properties are actually returning hard copy maps now. And for this reason, this has prompted the board to look at phasing out those hard copy maps in favour of the online reporting tool. As this graph shows, properties who are reporting wild dog activity has unfortunately fallen to 23%, which is very, very low. And it's actually the lowest amount of reporting that we've actually had since the program started in 2009. And I hope this decline in reporting is due to a decrease in wild dog activity and impacts being seen. But I suspect it probably has a bit to do with complacency. So just remember, even a blank map showing no wild dog activity on your property, or a brief email explaining that you haven't observed any wild dog activity, is much better than no information at all, because at least that gives us some sort of indication on what you're seeing on the ground on your property. But regardless of the reason behind the decline in reporting, any information received from the landholders is anecdotal and can only be used as really a guide to determine long-term trends in wild dog activity or look at localised impacts, and it's not representative of what is actually going on across the entire region. But despite these limitations, it's the best data that we have. So, it's the best tool that we've got to determine what's going on out there on the ground. But despite the limitations to the data, we strongly encourage landholders to continue to report information, because we really need that to make sure that it's making a difference for the program. So the next few slides will actually look at some of the data that's been collected through that recorded information shared from landholders and professional trappers. Now, has that screen caught up? Just let me go back. Oh, there we go. Okay. No, it hadn't. Right. Okay. So this graph shows reported wild dog activity, which includes dogs that have been seen, as well as other evidence of their presence, such as scats and tracks that have been reported to us by landholders. It also displays the total amount of wild dogs that have been controlled, which includes dogs that have been trapped and shot by professional trappers. Despite the limitations with the amount of data received, it clearly shows an increase in wild dog sightings over the past 3 financial years. So we're not out of the woods yet. And as you can see, drought conditions in 2018, when things were really, really bad, we've come a really long way from there and things are getting better, but it doesn't take long for complacency to kick in and then we're back to where we started from. So what I see when I look at this graph is similar to what's been recorded in other states with wild dog control programs. There's a significant increase in wild dog activity, and in this case, like I mentioned, the drought in 2018-19, and this prompted an increase in coordinated control, and that coordinated control resulted in, in a reduction in the population of dogs, which in turn resulted in a decrease in sightings and reported impacts. And then the complacency kicks in, and then everyone has a perceived view that dog activity has been controlled, and everyone gets a bit relaxed about it. And then dog numbers start to increase, and it's not long before we start to have impacts. So I think really at the moment we're in that phase of the cycle where wild dog numbers are starting to increase again, but we're not actually seeing the impacts. And that's exactly why I put this graph in. So this is reported stock damage over the past, 5 or 6 years. And you can see that, stock damage is very, very low. And I think at the moment, we're at 9 stock reported to have been killed by wild dogs in the 2023-24 financial year. That's in that entirety of that zone 1 that's inside the fence, which is fantastic. And it's a far cry from spring 2018, where we had 4,749 stock reported as being killed by wild dogs. So now I'll move on to the only other region in our area in SA region that has some requirements for mandatory baiting, and that's the buffer zone. So that's a 35-kilometre buffer zone outside the dog fence, and in this area there is mandatory baiting required in that area, but it's at quite a lot lower levels than what it is in that sheep country that's inside the fence. So in this region, properties must lay 10 baits within 10 kilometres of each active man-made water point, and that's in spring and autumn as well. So I don't have a lot of data on this area, but I'll share what I've got. So looking at the buffer zone, this is participation in baiting and total bait numbers that have gone out. And despite the mandatory baiting requirements for the buffer zone, the total participation at coordinated bait injection services remains very low at around 30% of landholders that fall into that area. Though looking at it, the number of baits on the properties far exceeds the required amount. And the required amount is actually shown on that graph as that green line. The blue line is the actual baits that have gone out. The intent of this wild dog policy for this area is to reduce the pressure on the dog fence from wild dogs migrating south from up north in that higher cattle country. And this data doesn't include baiting conducted by dog fence patrolmen, which is part of their fortnightly inspection process while they're out there. And when we split that information down or that data down, we can see that, there's a few properties that are baiting, but they're baiting at high levels. But we still have a lot of properties that are not baiting at all, and that's something that we're certainly going to have to work on if we're going to take the pressure off of that dog fence. And with those properties not baiting, it could result in higher pressure on the dog fence from wild dogs, and uh, may end up causing more incursions through the fence if they don't increase that baiting. And of course, this just reaffirms what I was saying before. Looking at this data, we certainly have had an increase in dog sightings. So that's seen dogs, tracks and scats over the last, year and a half, which means that those populations are, due to really good conditions up there, up north of the fence, that dogs are breeding up and they are starting to, move down and put pressure on that fence. And I do fear that we're probably, one decent flood event away from a large incursion through that fence into the sheep zone inside. Right, so another area in our region, and I won't focus too much on this, I've only got a couple of slides, but we do have the area which is outside the fence. So that's the section of the SA region that is above that 35k buffer zone. Now, I did want to include this information, even though there's no mandatory baiting requirements up there. But the next slide will make a bit more sense on why I still put it in. But wild dog control in this area is very different to the other regions because dingoes are a non-protected native species with no requirements for destruction. Properties can choose to do control on wild dogs if they're experiencing impacts to stock or for public safety, but the emphasis is really on seasonal management and not eradication. So properties aren't permitted to trap up in this area, and they're limited in the amount of baits that they're actually allowed to distribute on their property in a 12-month period. The main reason I wanted to include this district in this presentation is just to show that in the 2023-24 financial year, we had a significant increase in requests by properties north of the fence for bait injection services. And that's purely because of, fears that the dog numbers are getting to levels now that they're very concerned for stock impacts. And like I said, the main reason I wanted to include this slide and this information in this presentation is just to say that, this is often a strong indicator that wild dog impacts further south will soon follow as, dogs start to head south as things start to warm up and dry out up there after this really good seasonal conditions that they've had. So we do have a tiny little bit of property you can see here in SA region that falls into region 2 or other areas in SA, and this area has different requirements for baiting as well. It's not mandatory to bait unless you see signs of dogs, and the rules only apply to properties that are greater than 300 hectares. But I thought it was really important to share this information in the presentation because we've only recently, since I think 2000, have taken over this region, and I just wanted to share that although there's not many recorded dog activity or events or impacts in that area, there has been increased fox activity in the area, and I'll move on to the next slide. And we've certainly had an increase in properties requesting fox baits and putting fox baits out because of the impacts and the number of foxes that they're seeing in the area. So it's fantastic that's happening, and I hope it continues into the future. Now, I've only got 2 more slides to go, and I think most presentations I like to put this slide in. So this is actual wild dog activity reported to the SAL board in the 2018-2019 financial year. And I like to share this slide at the end of my presentations because, this is when things were as bad as they've been since I've been running the program in 10 years. You can see there, if you have a look at the key, green dots, dogs that have been trapped. Red dots are dogs that have been shot. Blue dots are triangles are dogs that have been seen, and the purple squares are stock loss. And you can see we had a lot of activity inside the fence and some major issues that were happening at that time. And to my final slide of the presentation, which is data that's been recorded this financial year so far. And I know we've got a couple of weeks to go and there might be a couple more dots to add to there, but you can see there's been a massive reduction, and I'm pretty pleased with landholders in our region and how hard they've worked to control dogs. And this is just a bit of a reminder how far we've come, and just also a reminder that if we don't keep on top of it, if we don't continue doing the control, it's not going to be long till we end up back here again. And that's the end of my presentation. Has anybody got any questions? Was that a question, Pete? Oh, yeah, you've got your hand up. Just let me turn your mic on. Are you there, Pete?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, mate. Yep.
Oh, good. Yeah. Do you receive reports from the dog fence patrolmen and women on their patrols where they record dog signs and sightings and shot or poisoned dogs from all the patrol staff?
Not all the patrol staff, but certainly a few of them. And you can see out on the New South Wales border a lot of those blue triangles that are where the old dog fence was above Mullyungaree there. They are certainly reports from one of the patrolmen out there, but we don't get reports from all of them, unfortunately.
No, I'll see what I can do about organising it.
It's certainly really good, interesting data to know how much pressure is being put on that dog fence in certain areas.
Yes, but they send their report in after every fortnight patrol, and yeah, I think soon they'll be all having a common type report. And
Yep.
when they usually cite tracks, controls, and results.
That would be fantastic to add to the data set to actually see what's going on in that buffer zone. That'd be great.
Thank you.